Hello, good afternoon. Thank you for coming. My name is David, and today we'll be talking about Tableau Server. I also realize that I'm all that stands between you and Iron Viz, followed by Data Night Out. So hopefully we'll make this session worthwhile for you. For today's session, I have three main objectives. The first objective is that you get a better understanding of Tableau as a platform, that you get a better understanding about Tableau Server in particular. The second objective is I hope that most of you leave today with more questions than when you came in. That means I've piqued your interest, and maybe you can take a look at some of the Tableau Server advanced sessions that are still going on tomorrow. The third objective is I would like you to learn something that you can take back to work, something new you haven't seen, maybe a couple of tips you can use as server admins or just server users. I also have three slides that I think are worthwhile taking a picture of. They are noted, but don't try and take a picture of every single slide because there's way too many. But there's three of those that I think are worthwhile for reference later. With that, let's get started. We can start talking about Tableau as a platform and Tableau Server without trying to understand the differences between traditional BI and modern BI. So traditional BI, it's like classical music. It has been around for ages. It's marked by structure and order. Catholic monks have developed the first form of modern European musical notation. The idea there was to standardize liturgy throughout the worldwide church. Western stuff, essentially what it does is indicates to a performer the tempo, the mode, the rhythm, the pitches of a piece of music. But it leaves less room for practices such as improvisation that you may find in musical styles like jazz and blues. When you think about traditional BI technologies, those often lack the flexibility available to the end user and are very constrained in their ability to put the end user as the star player in the analysis. And this was something that Salipsky alluded to yesterday on the first keynote. When we talk about traditional BI, we end up, and if we use Tableau on a traditional BI form, you end up with the BI focus on limiting access to users. Your business users feel like governance restricts their ability to add value. Tableau deployments that focus on the same kind of idea end up just repeating the same errors from before, just recreating reports in another tool, and that leading to frustration, and it fails to leverage the capabilities of Tableau to the fullest. So your creators become bottlenecks for your business users and can only move as quickly as the reports they produce, leaving them feeling like this. When I think about companies making use of modern BI, I feel like they are they are like jazz clubs delivering the best of live music, of live improvisation on any given night. This is here in New Orleans, by the way, Preservation Hall. If you get a chance, check it out. And we're going to hear from them today at the Data Night Out. With strong roots in tradition and improvisation, jazz continues to evolve, getting influence from African Latin music and pretty much any other music that comes in contact with. We can hear that firsthand here. So on the business side, if we think about that, allowing our users to improvise and dig into the data to find their insights is really the way to go rather than trying to create one size fits all. So everyone is allowed to be creative and to diverge a little bit from that one path that you've created. But don't think for a second that having that idea of using modern BI is the Wild West. Having this type of approach doesn't mean that your analytics function is a chaos. Providing guidance rather than rules leads to better adoption and continuous improvement by the end users. In BI, this means that you're not reinventing the wheel. You're learning from paths well traveled. That's why you're here today. You're hearing other sessions where other organizations have already maybe are a little bit further in the path than the organization that you work at. And hopefully you learn and you're able to apply those things when you go back. So essentially allowing your business users the freedom to use analytics to add value within the business. I think I would sum it up as guiding, not limiting. And it feels a little bit like the old music shops where you had some organization that you could search maybe for Beatles on B, but that wouldn't stop you from looking back and get Motorhead from the other side. When done well, it provides structure without limiting. But let's look at that and how can we do that within Tableau. We can talk about Tableau platform. I'm sure all of you have heard this about 10 times in the past 2 days, Tableau as a platform. But what do we actually mean when we talk about a platform and a product? What's the difference between the two? So a product is fairly static and is not expandable. A platform, on the other hand, can be expanded across depending on what we need. A product is a silo unto itself, whereas a platform is a piece within a greater puzzle. The reason why I have Google here is that if you think back 20 years ago, Google was just a product, very much like Tableau. So you had a web search, and that's all they did. So it was a search engine. Nowadays, if you think about Google, you have social media, you have navigation, you have the ability, still the same search engine, and a raft of other companies under the same umbrella within the platform. Tableau is no different. So Tableau, when it came in 2003, you only have that desktop for you to be able to visualize data. But now that has evolved, and we've seen that today on the Devs on Stage. So let's take a look at that in a little bit more detail. So this is Tableau platform. When you start there on that side, that can be whatever you want. Whatever database you work with, flat files, special files, doesn't really matter. Is it data? Gets pushed through the pipeline. You can, of course, prepare using Tableau Prep, the ability of combining, shaping data, and publishing that within the server. It's going to be even fun and more fun when we have conductor. Visualize the old trusty Tableau desktop that you are able to create ad hoc analysis and just visualize the data. But that wouldn't be very valuable if you don't have the ability of sharing that content, right? The ability of pushing that out into Tableau Server. This is the self-hosted version, Tableau Online. That's the one that you're going to be using if your Tableau is hosting it for you and you don't have to manage it. Either of those you can access using your phones, using iPad or using Android. Tableau Public, if you've not used this before, I highly encourage you to. It's free. You don't use that with your company's data, but it's probably your best learning platform in terms of using Tableau. And Tableau Reader, which is kind of a thing that's going away, particularly because now with the new subscription model, everyone gets access to everything. Here's your first opportunity for a picture. Okay, so for anyone that hasn't seen Tableau Server, and I doubt, this is what Tableau Server looks like. You have access to all your information there. Where can you get it? Short answer is everywhere. More detailed answer is on your on-site hardware, using virtualized environments, things like VMware and things like that. On the cloud, AWS, Google Platform, Microsoft Azure, that's all available to you. Tableau Server releases. Tableau Server is not really a new product. It's been around for 10 years. And the first version that you still get within access from the Tableau site is version 4. The thing that I would like you to think about is that if you are new to Tableau and if you're new to Tableau Server in particular, you shouldn't expect a product that is static. What will happen is you see a lot of development coming in. I would like you to take into account that the last 5 years have seen the number of releases increasing, the speed that they are coming in. But more importantly, this area here in blue, what is showing is the last 18 months. So the last 18 months has Linux, which for some of you that are on a Linux house, the fact of having just one application in Windows, that was a bottleneck. And you also have a couple of others. Hyper, so a whole new engine extract that allows your queries to be faster. But one of my favorite ones in 2018.2, Tableau Services Manager, which allows me to make changes in configuration within Tableau Server without restart. That means two things. I get home early, because I don't need to stay in the office, and I don't need to turn up on a Saturday or log in to try and make those changes on configuration. This is just a bit of fun. So on this side is version 4. Yes, I installed it in preparation for this talk. And the other side is version 10.5. Let's talk a little bit about some of the features. I've already touched on Hyper, TSM. Those are important. Rename workbooks. Those are also good. Subscription improvements and asset projects are all our favorite for this year. Dashboard extensions just takes our ability in terms of what we can do within dashboard and an extra step. Certified data sources. The more we move towards democratizing our data within our organizations, this comes into play. The ability of encouraging our analysts to reuse existing data sources rather than building a new one every time that they have a new question. Data source certification really enables your creators to promote specific data sources in your Tableau deployments. If you're a server and admin, this is important. Certified data sources get preferential treatment when it comes to searches. But let's look under the hood. Your second picture opportunity. Tableau Server within processes focus in three main areas. Thinking about the operational side, you can think about the storage and the back end. Okay, first one that we're going to be looking at is the application server. So what an application server does in terms of a process, it generates the web page that your users get access to. It's the process that's going to run and it's going to load that page. You're going to have one per node if you have a cluster environment. If you only have one single node, you only have that one. Also makes REST API calls. The second one is your gateway. This is just a simple web server. Handles anything that happens with Tableau Server from a request perspective. Anyone that's clicking on a filter, anyone that's clicking on the actual visualization to load the view, that runs through a gateway. If you have more than one node, you're going to have to use a load balancer rather than having just a URL for that one server so that it gets routed to the gateways available. Cache server. This is a favorite of mine. Essentially what it does is the ability to provide faster queries to your users by storing those. So someone comes in first thing in the morning, the data gets loaded, the next person that comes in, that query is already in cache, so they get served the dashboard a bit quicker. A good tip is to use cache warming. What does it mean for cache warming? You can use things like scripts or REST API calls to generate a query against a visualization that you really need to be fresh at, say, at 9 a.m. as soon as people come into the office. Your data server. This is going to manage your connections to Tableau Server data sources. It's every time that someone is accessing a data source, it's going to call this in, and you will need to add more if you have lots of published data sources. So if you think back to that certified data sources, this is where you'd use also a data server. Search and browse does what it says on the tin, is the ability of searching within your application. So when you're looking for ownership of someone, so if I'm looking for all the workbooks that fall under my name that I've published, I can search that. You'll see the ability of rebuilding the index. I've been working with Tableau Server for a while. I've never had the need to rebuild the index on search. So leave the button alone unless you really need to. Data engine. That changed recently. So before you had a choice, now you don't. Data engine, up until 10.5, you choose whether to install or not. Now it gets installed every time that you install one of those 5 processes within. Repository. If you forget all the other processes, this is the one you should remember. This is a Postgres database. Stores all your account details. If you are on Active Directory, that's all it stores. If you are on local authentication, it would also store your passwords. You have a lot of information there in terms of historical tables, so who used the data, who logged in when. You have other information around the groups and the users and the workbooks and the extracts. Background tasks get stored for 30 days, the other tables for around 6 months. Of course, this is configurable. You can change that if need be. Quick tip, if you're querying this Postgres database, make sure you're running extracts because Tableau is extremely chatty, and the last thing you want to do is to slow down server for your users just because you're querying the database. File store. It replicates your extracts, so your extracts get replicated across the different nodes if you have the file store there. If you need to move it from one side to another, Tableau will tell you you have to decommission, and that's absolutely fine, essentially just stopping that process so that it can move to another area. Vizql server, you'll hear a lot about this one. Essentially what it does is just querying, so using a Vizql language, is querying your database by sending the queries to the database, right? I'm super excited about this. I don't have to restart that again. The ability of just adding more of these if I need to without restarting is great. So you're going to need to add more if you have a lot of users accessing your views. licensing. So when it comes to process handling, and it's not configurable. As soon as you install Tableau Server for the first time, that one is there. One thing that's very important is that from version 2018.2, there's no longer a need for a backup primary. So in short sentence, before you'd had to replicate a primary node backup, so you have another server that you could move the license across if you had failover on that node. That's no longer necessary, and what you can do is just say, I want to move my license from node 1 to node 2 or to node 3, and you don't have that issue anymore. Of course, there is a little bit of downtime, but you don't have to maintain the overhead of having another server. Backgrounder, again, this is with Vizql is another one that you probably hear a lot, is essentially the workforce of Tableau. Anything that is to do with tasks, so when you have an extract refresh, subscription, data-driven alerts, and data source recommendation, that's going to be running. If you have a lot of extracts, you should be using more of backgrounders on there. Again, like Vizql, no restart needed. And this, again, good news. Cluster controller. That one was very simple. It's the one that keeps an eye on everything and will notify you if you have any problems with it within the status of your server. Rest in peace, tab admin. Does anyone know what tab admin is? Great, so that's gone. Hello, TSM. So Tableau Services Manager is the new one, and how we're going to be managing Tableau Server from now on. Configure Tableau on the web. So the first installation you get, you're going to need to use a license to be able to do the configuration. You can also set up your SMTP and everything else. Trusted authentication, you no longer need to write command line for that. You can do that on the browser. And I'll keep repeating this throughout. No more restarts. When you're adding Vizql and backgrounders, you just add those in. Scaling. For anyone new to Tableau Server, or for someone that just got handed the keys and said, oh, we have this thing, and the Tableau Server admin left, and now you're going to deal with that because you seem like you know about Tableau. When we talk about Tableau, about scaling in general, there's two things that you can talk about. One is scaling up. And essentially what it is just adding more, change the configuration so you add more CPU, you can add more backgrounders, for instance, in the case of Tableau, or you add more memory to your machine. The pros, you only have to manage one server. Cons, you don't have any failure backup. So if that server is gone, you have to restore everything on a new server, and that takes time. The other way of scaling is the one that you'll hear a lot from enterprise companies, is to provide the ability of scaling out. So what you have is the ability of having 3 nodes, and you have pros, you have redundancy built in, so if one node goes down, your users can still use the other ones, and you have additional resource for peak times, but also the ability of distribute resources. So here, if you think about node 2, that's going to be for all my users accessing views, and node 3 is going to be for all the extract refreshes that are being run. And what you have is, and you're isolating the resources, that way one doesn't conflict with the other. And a couple of handy tools, and these are all open source tools that you can use to manage your Tableau Server environment. They generally split in 4 areas, so performance monitoring, scalability, and maintenance. You don't need to use them all. And this is your third picture opportunity. You don't need to use them all because in some ways they kind of overlap, some of them, but there are some that are quite key. First one, performance recorder. Like Tableau Desktop, you have that available on Tableau Server. And this was quite interesting, and I wasn't going to include this on today's talk because I thought that everyone knew. Until Paul Chapman, who runs the JLL Center of Excellence, I just came back from his talk. He tweeted this the other day and saying, oh, I had no idea this was around. He's been using Tableau for about 6 years. The way that you do it is just add record performance equals yes to the end of your URL, and then you're able to any query that you run or any clicks and actions that you do generates a query. You stop that performance recorder, and you get a workbook that you can analyze. Admin views. If you haven't started looking at anything, start here. This will tell you, for instance, in case of performance, how long a visualization is taking to load, so load times and things like that. and then you are able to see. You don't need to do any configuration, it comes out of the box. Those are available to anyone that is either a site or server admin. This is a new one. It's called Lumbersnake. It's an evolution of Lumberjack. It's done by Tom Christian. He's here as well. He's one of Tableau's best. It's all run, essentially what it does is uses the Vizql logs and transform that in a kind of way that makes sense to Tableau to analyze data. And it's developed in Python and it's available on GitHub. If you are a GitHub developer and you want to work with Christian, he's looking for more people to develop more on this tool. This is kind of fairly new. He's been working on this for about 6 months. Scout. So Scout is another one of the open source tools, and it's great for getting exact load times for the users. It's good for performance testing, so you can record what a user is doing, and you can check, do A/B and testing for user acceptance as well to understand if changes in configuration that you've made, if they have an impact on Tableau Server or not. Monitoring, we go back to admin views again out of the box. Things like space utilization. If your background tasks are running okay, what is the delay on that? So for instance, if you have set the number of extracts to be refreshed at 8 a.m., and then you come in and most of them are being kicked in at 9, that means that you have delay in the number of tasks because Tableau backgrounder is single-threaded, and what's going to happen is only can run 2 of those at the same time if you have 2 backgrounders, and so only runs the next extract when it has a free lane. So you need to think about priority, and you can set priority within Tableau Server for those. So if you set everything for the same hour for 8 a.m., you're going to see some delays on that. So admin views will be able to give you that information. Repository. And this one is what I mentioned earlier, so using historical tables. What I've done here is just looking at the times in the day that people are logging in. This is one of our servers at Interworks. That's why I think the date is very strange. I don't believe the time that most people go into the server is after lunch on a Tuesday. But it might be. I just don't quite believe it. What it might have to do is because we have a bunch of subscriptions and things that get kicked in. So that's probably why. The next thing is data-driven alerts. So again, if you're not using that, and if you use that in tandem with your repository, what you can do is say, I want any visualization that has an average load time of 30 seconds. I want to be alerted by that, for that. And you can create a dashboard using the PostgreSQL repository, and then you publish that, set a data-driven alert, and you get notified. Same thing for disk space and things like that. This is an example of an email that I received. And in this case, what we're looking at is IoT data, so sensors from fabrics and breakages. But I thought it was an interesting example of just getting that data information and getting alerted. Tabmon. Tabmon you can use to monitor CPU and RAM within your hardware, network and hard disk usage as well. You can view that on these types of metrics that resemble the admin views. It's a good place to start if you're not currently monitoring your hardware. Some updates are we've seen a few issues, but hopefully those kind of get resolved soon. Logshark. This one is good if you're not in a hurry. What this does, it grabs all your logs and it parses them all out. So it might take a little while to process everything, but gives you all the metrics across log data. That's quite important when you're seeing errors, you're trying to do diagnostics. You want to parse everything rather than trying to read logs on Notepad++ or something like that. So it's a good way to try to identify any issues. If we look at scalability, we can talk about that without mentioning TSM. Again, the ability of adding more nodes or adding more Vizql caches and stuff like that to be able to configure our server to be optimal for us. I think that's key. TabJolt. Has anyone heard of TabJolt? No? Okay, so TabJolt is a point and run tool for scalability. What it does, it replicates, you have a number of mixes, but the mix that I prefer is a 50-50 view and interact, mimicking what a user would do. So you provide TabJolt with a number of views that you want it to query, and then you provide it with a mix, in this case, 50%. If a visualization has a filter, TabJolt will try and click. If it has 2 filters, only clicks on one of those. But then you can define time and concurrency. And that's quite useful, particularly if you're thinking about, okay, we've started with 10 users. Now we're going to do 100, and then we need to do 1,000. And you need to justify within the business if you can scale up. So that's how you do that. And then you have replayer, which is kind of similar to TypeJolt, but you can be a lot more specific. It uses LogShark and gets the information from LogShark to know what the URL's construct was. So understands what your usage is like, because we're all different and all our organizations are all different. So for instance, these guys, their company might have a very different profile. They might be the ones that look at data very religiously first thing in the morning. You guys might be staying late in the office and look at data at that time. And the way that we operate within dashboards. So replayer allows you to do that, and also A/B testing, if you think about, say, moving from 2018.1 to 2018.2. Finally, our final area in terms of tab migrate. In short terms, what it does is you are able to pull the workbooks from one server, push them down, and then push them up to another server. What you can do that is to, for instance, if you're pulling from an acceptance environment into a production environment, you would use tab migrate. The other handy thing, and that's the one that I showed you here, is an inventory of the content within your server. So if you just walked into a new job or you've been handed a new server, you can, I have no idea what goes in here. You can just run tab migrate, and it's going to give you a CSV and then a workbook that allows you to see that. This is kind of one new one for me as well. Pardon. This is a new one for me as well. Tab compare, again from someone from Tableau. And what it allows you to do is to identify changes within a workbook. Particularly key for those of you that are still pre to 10.4. Anyone pre 10.4? And on 10.3? Okay, a few people. So if you are on 10.3 or less, everything is working okay. You go to 10.4 or after, and you get a new padding, so padding that's been added to the dashboards. And that's what that image there is showing you. So you will show whether or not changes to that workbook. And then you know which workbooks to fix. Because if you don't have something like tab compare, what you end up with is that you have to go through that view by view by view to make sure that they haven't changed. Finally, and this is something that's very key, is the ability of using REST API. The ability of using either Python or other script language to create custom applications or script interactions with Tableau Server. So for instance, you could tell Tableau Server to create a project anytime that something happens. You could have an option to query a site or query or update a site or delete a site. So if you have a number of tasks in terms of maintenance, you could script those using REST API. So those are some of the tools that are available to you in terms of open source. Of course, there are other tools in the market. These are the ones available from GitHub and Tableau Server Admin. How do you get Tableau Server? So back until last year, there were two main ways. You get core and you get named user. From 2017, a subscription model came in, which changes things slightly. In terms of named user, there were a couple of things. So there was that sometimes prevented us from moving as quickly as we would want it. So sometimes there was no distinction between users with low frequency and users that going to access Tableau every day. There was low cost at low numbers, but in terms of expansion, it was high in terms of per user cost. So if I had logged in every single day, the cost would be the same as Bridget here logging in once every 6 months. On the core side, what we've used to see is that it wasn't great if you were doing performance activity heavy tasks. So we were trying to control that by limiting web edit or web authoring. We always kind of err on the side of caution of using large extracts, and that often failed in us providing a true self-service approach for the users. Because what we would end up doing is, yes, if I open web edit, you're going to have queries, it's going to get slow, and then I don't have servers, so I might as well I'll build a dashboard for you. And that's never ideal. So subscription kind of changes things a little bit. You can get this one on Tableau site. I prefer this one. This is my abridged version. Is what do I get if I'm a creator? All the things. So you get Tableau Prep, you get all the new features that are being announced. If you are an Explorer, you get web authoring, which can now enable you self-service, because then you're no longer on a situation like on core. If you need more resources, you either add more memory, more CPU, or you scale out, as we've seen, and add more nodes, and you have more hardware. And then the viewer is your report consumer, right? So the ones that, those two guys are doing all the work for this guy here. But that's kind of the idea, is to provide that content. So I believe that Tableau, particularly in some fringe areas, so if you are on an 8-core to 16-core, or if you're an end user, and you're kind of on the verge to go to core, I think Tableau licensing and role changes do create the possibility for implementations that are larger and more complete than previously possible. So I think almost to finish is, in terms of myths, and I think we've kind of looked at, is Tableau Server is difficult to understand. It's getting easier and easier, and it's stopping from being this thing that's kind of up in the sky and most people don't understand. Tableau Server is difficult to manage. I think I just showed you about 12 tools that you can use, and they're open source, so there's no cost to organization, so you can just start using those. And that web edit lacks features. I also don't think that's the case. It's not quite parity, but it's getting quite close, and it's going to be parity very soon. So you need to start thinking about how you move your users towards that. So finally, we looked at first Tableau as a platform, and the difference between a platform and a product. We looked at all the processes that are within Tableau Server. We also looked at some of the tools I'm going to be handing to you, and hopefully you can use some of those when you go back to your office next week or at the end of this week. With that, I hope you've enjoyed the session. I'm happy to take any questions, and I hope to see most of you today at Data Night Out. Thank you. Sure. What I'll do is I'll give you the mic. It's easy.
So I don't think I took good notes on my other class, but which of these tools do not work on Linux web server versus Windows?
Yeah, I think the majority of them are going to be the ones that do not. I think Tabmon doesn't, and LogShark doesn't. Repository is there, admin views are there, TabJolt is there, because essentially TabJolt is a point and run, so it doesn't really need the environment. Any other questions?
So currently we are in 10.5.3, which is, and we are using the core-based license.
Mm-hmm.
So we are not into that Creator Explorer viewer. So
Sure.
What would be the changes? I don't know, like, will it be the smooth transition to that, or do I need to go for that, or I can just continue whatever I'm doing?
Because that's actually commercially and licensing related, I would say that the best way to get an answer for that is to speak to your account manager at Tableau. The transition is smooth. Whether or not you want to stay on core or move to the new licensing model, I would speak to the account manager.
Okay.
I'm more on the technical side, so even at Interworks, I always defer to my salespeople.
I know that the architecture for 2018.2 is slightly different from 10.5 on Windows. So the upgrade process, is it any different?
From 2018.1 to 2018.2?
10.5 to 2018.2.
Yeah, so as soon as whatever version you go from to 2018.2, it's not as straightforward as before. So before it was just a get exe, next, and that's no longer the case. 1, make a backup. 2, make a backup and move that somewhere else. What you're going to have to do is to say to uninstall that version, so it's going to be a fresh, clean install. So that's going to be the case for this first version. We've seen a few issues with that. So I would encourage you to do that on non-prod environments first. Make sure that everything is working okay. I was able to install fresh on an AWS machine, no problem. I was also able to upgrade from a 10.5 cluster. That was a bit of a few hiccups, but then in the end it was fine. Or wait for a sub-release in the next couple weeks.
So sometime next quarter, we plan on moving to Linux as well. Does it make sense to upgrade to 2018.2 on Windows first and then moving it to 2018.2 on Linux, or it doesn't really matter?
If it was me, what I would do is stick where you are. If you're moving in a couple months, I would provide the environment for Linux, install the new version there, test, validate that everything is okay. You can also, of course, restore from backup, make sure that everything is okay, and then decommission the Windows machine when you're ready. Any other questions? Okay, if there's no any other questions, thank you very much. Enjoy Iron Viz as well. Thank you.